PowerPoint for Chapter 13 of our textbook, Comparative Victimology. So what is comparative research? So this is data gathered from more than one nation. So instead of just looking at the victimization that happens in the United States, which is what we've been doing so far in this course, comparative research looks at victimization in different countries and then compares them. So there's several ways we can do this. So first is an international study. This is data collected in 2 or more countries using the same survey, the same methodology, the same instruments. So the data collected in the same way in different countries. As you can imagine, this is something that's really difficult to do. There has not been very many international victimization studies. They're very, very, very expensive, especially if you're using a representative population in these countries. Of course, it's more difficult to do this in developing countries, getting a hold of people, just the translators. So it's a very, very large undertaking, very, very difficult to do these sorts of studies. So a national victimization study is a study that takes place in only one nation. So the NCVS, that's an example of a national victimization study. And while they're much easier to do than the international studies, we can't really use them to make comparisons between countries. So, of course, different countries have different criminal codes, different things are considered a crime, different things constitute victimization. So it's very, very, very difficult to measure exactly the extent of crime between countries, extent of victimization between countries. And also it's, the methodology is different for each of these national studies. So it's very, very difficult to make comparisons this way. So the International Crime Victim Study is one of these studies that has been taken place across different nations, but it's only been collected 5 times. Like I said, it's very, very difficult to do. It's very, very, very expensive. So it's not something that can feasibly be done every single year. So 78 countries have participated, so a good number of countries in both developed and developing nations, and it measures 10 types of victimization. So theft, sexual victimization, robbery, assault, and it's about 2,000 respondents in each study. So, not a huge sample size considering there's 78 different countries. Again, it's probably due to the fact that it's so expensive and so difficult to get respondents in all these different countries. So the way that this has been done in the past is using random digit dialing. So this is when phone numbers are randomly dialed in each country. And it seemed to work up until 2005, but this is something that would not really be feasible to use today. Most of us do not answer random numbers dialing us. There's so many spam calls. A lot of spam calls are blocked now. So it's just something that would not be feasible to do. Also, a lot of developing countries, a lot of the people probably don't even have phones. So this methodology is probably not going to work anymore, and hopefully, they'll figure something else out to do in the future. Okay, so this is from the International Victimization Study, and it just kind of shows the extent of victimization in different countries. So here in the USA, where it seemed to be a little bit above average, we're lower than some of the other countries, so lower than Ireland for assaults and threats. However, a lot of the other European nations, Italy, Portugal, Hungary, Austria, these all have much lower rates of assaults in the United States, and Japan's is very, very low. So Japan is known to have a very, very low crime rate. Okay, another international study that has been done is the International Self-Report Delinquency Study. So this is not a study on how often people are victimized, but rather how much crime people have engaged in. So this has been collected 3 times, most recently in 2019, so much more recently than our other victimization study. And they asked kids in 6 to 8 grades the extent of delinquency. So this might be a little I guess, younger than the most sort of common age for crime. Usually it's late teens that people are most likely to engage in crime, so they asked this a little bit before. Not too sure why they wouldn't ask in high school instead. So they asked about bullying, theft, violence, hate crimes, child abuse, etc., etc. And different countries present their own statistics for this. Okay, so now we're going to talk about several different national victimization studies that have taken place. So first up is Australia. So Australia has a similar study to the National Crime Victimization Survey. They call it Crime Victimization Australia. About 4.4% of people over 15 experienced a violent crime between 2020 and 2021. And 9.4% experienced a property crime. They found that sexual assault increased during this time. I'm not too sure if this is actual assault or just the reporting of assaults. And the reporting rates are pretty similar to the United States. Australia maybe has slightly lower crime rate than the United States, but still pretty similar. So the Crime Survey of England and Wales, again, is another similar survey. And it's an annual self-report survey of about 40,000 households across the UK. And they did find that there's a 14% increase in crime from 2019 to 2021, probably due to COVID-related factors, and a 47% increase in fraud. So this is around the same increase that we found here in the United States as well. So 27% decrease in violent crime attributed to COVID. Again, we don't really know if that is all violent crimes or just the reporting of violent crimes. And about 20% of respondents experience victimization. So England and Wales tends to have a little bit lower crime rates than the United States as a whole. Okay, so the General Social Survey of Victimization is what is used in Canada. It's collected every 5 years, so not nearly as often as the NCVS is, probably due to the lack of funding. The latest one was collected in 2019, so we don't know whether things have changed since COVID. About 1 in 5 Canadians were a victim of crime. Women more likely than men to be sexual assault victims, same as in the United States. But Canada tends to have a really low reporting rate, so only 30% of Canadians reported victimization to the police. This is maybe a little bit lower than the United States. The United States estimate probably about 35 to 50%, depending on the crime. Okay, so for justice system responses. So if we are a victim of a crime in one country, and, we have someone doing these horrible, international type crimes, we need somewhere that is able to respond to this. So the United Nations has both national and international laws for crime victims. So that, if you're a crime victim in one country that doesn't, have any rights for you, well then, maybe the United Nations can help you out a bit. So the United Nations has a Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for victims of crime and abuses of power. So they have universal rights that are available to everyone. So fair treatment and justice, restitution, compensation, and victim assistance. So the United Nations also put out the Handbook of Justice for Victims. So in a lot of developing countries, maybe they don't necessarily have, victims' rights. They maybe couldn't, get organized in order to do this, didn't know how. So the United Nations helped them out by making a handbook that allows developing countries to create victim services programs. So they'll give recommendations on what the best victim service solutions to use. And they also give them training on how to best assist victims of crime in their country. Okay, so the International Court of Justice is another feature of the UN. It's located in the Netherlands, and it resolves issues presented by countries belonging to the UN. And it provides legal opinions to these countries as well. So one example of a case in the International Court Court of Justice is that of Hissène Habré. He was an ex-dictator from Chad. He committed a bunch of horrible crimes, killed thousands of people. And the International Court of Justice ruled in favor in Belgium and said that Belgium was able to extradite him and try him because he wasn't going to be tried in Chad. So he was the first head of the nation to be convicted of human rights abuses in another nation. So although he committed his acts in Chad, he was able to be convicted in Belgium for these acts. So the International Criminal Court is not governed by the UN, but it focuses on trying serious international crimes. So these crimes include genocide, which is crimes committed to destroying an ethnic, national, or religious group, often the governments of countries. Crimes against humanity, so these sort of widespread attacks by the government against its own civilians. So these include murder, rape, etc., slavery. War crimes, so violating the Geneva Convention, the rules of law that are set out. And then crimes of aggression, so aggression using military forces against civilians. So the Office of Public Counsel for Victims gives financial compensation to the victims. So they have this trust fund that victims are able to get compensation from for their experiences. So several different examples of these international crimes. The first is war crimes. Often this is rape or sexual assault. So this is used as a weapon of war to humiliate and make civilians flee the territory. This has been recently going on in the Ukraine by Russia. So reports of Russian soldiers committing sexual assault against Ukrainians in order to get them to exert power over them or to get them to flee the territory. And the International Criminal Court is currently gathering evidence. Another example is genocide. So a good example of this is the Rwandan Civil War in the 90s. So over 500,000 of the Tutsi ethnic minority civilians were killed by armed militia in Rwanda. Between 250,000 women, Tutsi women, were raped. And the U.S. established an international criminal tribunal for Rwanda to try the higher-ups that were responsible for this. So they made a completely new tribunal just to try this specific crime. Rwanda courts tried lower-level individuals, and they officially closed this in 2015. Okay, so for victims' rights and assistance, like I was saying, the developed countries usually have something similar to the United States. So European countries, specifically Western European countries, Australia, Canada, Japan, they tend to give more assistance and have, more rights than developing countries who maybe have not been able to, get organized in order to do this. They have other things going on. So Australia has the Victim Support Australia. United Nations has Victim Support Europe, and similar to the United States, they give information on what rights you get, financial support as well. You get advice. Canada has a Victim Bill of Rights, very similar to the United States. Right to information, protection, participation, and restitution. And they give financial assistance to victims of violent crime as well. So now for a couple examples from different countries. Bosnia and Herzegovina, as we all know, in the 90s, lots of turmoil happening then, and lots of victims of crime that weren't able to get any sort of assistance from the country. Because the government wasn't really doing much for them, the victim right movement was really started by women's groups after the war in order to meet the needs of the women and children who were victims of war violence. So they were able to kind of come together and sort of started this victim rights movement. So like I said, the government is not involved. These are private civilians that are doing this. And then Medica Zeneca, this is an organization that came in and provided services to the female victims of war crimes. Many of them were sexual assaults. So they give medical services to them, counseling, shelter, and legal aid. So another example of an international victims' rights and assistance is in India. So Tamil Nadu, they have these all-female police units that handle relationship problems which may lead to violence. So they help women with problems that they might have due to sort of these premarital problems, affairs, cheating, problems with their in-laws, dowries, husbands deserting them. So these all-female units are there to help other women, and these women experiencing these problems are probably going to be more comfortable going to these women rather than an all-male unit of police officers to help them.